All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the Kentico Rocks podcast, episode number 26, hosted by myself, Brian McKeiver. This podcast is all about Kentico, Kentico EMS, Kentico Content, .NET, .NET Core, and Azure, things that I love to do. Yeah, I can't believe it's actually the 26th episode. It's November 2019. Done a lot of these, doing pretty good, trying to get one a month. And today, I thought I would switch up a little bit and not necessarily talk about the community at large or what's kind of going on in the Kentico world, but actually dive deep into a technical topic that I hope maybe can save some developers some time out there for when they're working with .NET Core sites that, may use Kentico content or just general development practices around working with building and developing a site in MVC Core or .NET Core. So today we're going to talk about maybe what it means to do something that can help you develop faster. And it's something that may be familiar to a lot of Node developers or NPM front-end people out there. It's a concept of hot reloading. And it's something that we as .NET developers haven't always had, mainly because I think of the way that web forms has worked in the past and the whole .NET full framework and IIS and all these Visual Studio tools had to be involved. Well, that's all changed with .NET Core in the way that you handle things and can run it basically just .NET at an executable. So I'm going to go through basically all the steps it takes to add hot reloading to your development flow as a developer. We're going to install a new Kentico Content project using the newly updated MVC Boilerplate. In fact, I think it was like last week or maybe even a week and a half ago where the Kentico community team actually updated the Kentico Content MVC Boilerplate to .NET Core 3.0. So that's pretty cool. We get to use the latest and greatest stuff that was just released by Microsoft. So we're going to install that component. We're then going to walk through a new component that we can add into that solution to enable hot reloading, and then we're going to kind of do that thing and see how it changes your experience of maybe having to always hit the play button or waiting for something to build. And we're going to just try to make sure that happens automatically on your development machine. Because honestly, I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't know you could actually do this until a few months ago with .NET Core and MVC, because I'm used to just hitting play in Visual Studio to debug things and all those fun things that go with that. So with that, let's dive right into it. What we're going to do is minimize this page and talk a little bit about, if you're a new developer and you're not sure what or how to handle starting out with Kentico Content and maybe using this .NET Boilerplate. In fact, let's bring the Boilerplate project up a second. I got to get on the right monitor, of course. So here we are. Make sure that's out of the way. So, I'm here at the GitHub page with the Kentico Content Boilerplate. Again, newly updated just a few days ago. Really cool. Thanks, guys, for doing that. And it goes through some instructions. You could do this with a normal flow of your process if you're starting out with a project. If you want to start from cloning the repo or forking it or whatever you might do. But honestly, my favorite way to start working with this is using the .NET Core CLI. Shameless plug in case you don't remember, one of my episodes of this podcast was all about the .NET Core CLI and how to use it and all the various things it can do. And one of those things was actually using it as a way to install tools for your projects. And that's what we're going to do today. So these steps right here about how to install this boilerplate project as a template to work with the .NET Core CLI is the place I like to start. Now, again, you don't have to. You can do it any way you want to. But I'm going to walk through it just because I think it's pretty easy and it won't take very long. So in case you don't have it on your machine, here is the place to start with having that command. This is going to install the tool. And for those just listening, what we're going to do here is we're going to run a command called .NET new install as an argument, so -- install, and then Kentico.content.boilerplate with some funky syntax at the end of it, which is 2 colons and an asterisk. And what that really signifies is basically the scope or where you can run this from. And this installs the tool on your machine. So I'm switching over to a PowerShell location. I'm at a new folder I just created called HRL for hot reload. And I'm going to just kind of type or paste in those commands that we grabbed from the GitHub repository and run this. And what that's going to do is it's going to take a second. It's going to download the boilerplate as a template, put it in a kind of a global tool repository for you. And actually what's new with .NET Core 3 They just added the ability to have local tools with the .NET Core CLI that are local per project. I'm not going to get into that today, but maybe that's a future blog post idea. But you'll see that what happens is after that command successfully runs, at the very top of our list, we have a new template that we can use the .NET new command with. And that is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm back here. I'll hit Control L to kind of clear the screen a little bit. And I'm going to run a .NET new. And one thing you need with .NET new as a command in the CLI is what kind of thing you want to make. So actually I'm going to spell it right, .NET new. And I'm going to do Kentico. Oh, you know what? I can't remember the name of the template because I cleared the screen. But in case you don't know, you can actually always run -H to get a helpful list of all of the templates that appear. So I'm just going to look at it one more time here really quick so I can remember the name. So it's actually Kentico Content MVC. I think that name is updated on the Boilerplate project, but the new name definitely makes sense with the new rebranding of Kentico Content. Again, clear the screen. So I'm going to do .NET new as a command, and then I'm going to do Kentico Content MVC as my template. And then one thing that anytime you run a .NET new command, usually you don't really want it to not have a name with what you might want to call your project. Otherwise, it's going to use the context of the folder you're in. So if I don't change anything, if I just run this command, I would get a project called HRL, which is not really what we want. So in this case, I'm going to use the -N argument or switch, parameter, whatever you want to call it, and go with Kentico Content MVC. So I hit enter, I'm running that command. Again, it's going to take almost no time. It's ridiculously how fast it takes to do this. And it told me that the command succeeded, and we have this new template created successfully. So if I do a dir to look at it, we've got one folder that's set up with our project in it, and I'll dive into that a little bit and then show that structure to people watching. And you can see that we have our MVC project. This again is a starting point or the starting project that you get with working with Kentico Content in an MVC.NET Core way. And if you're not sure what this does and you didn't actually see the image on the GitHub page, the most basic way you can run it is actually another .NET Core command of .NET watch run. And you don't actually need to say watch. You could just do run or build, but I'm just in the habit of saying watch, so that's what we're going to do today. And what that's going to do is it's going to compile the project, and it's going to basically start up a little web server that we can use to make a request to this actual project. And it usually doesn't take this long, but maybe my Wi-Fi is a little slow today. But there we go. So it finished running, and it tells me that we're now listening on port 5000. So again, if I come down here and I come back to our browser and I start up a new browser session and I go to localhost 5000, it's going to basically show us, ta-da, we have a working Kentico Content MVC Boilerplate site. So pretty cool, right? I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to dive into it a whole lot, but that's the flow of that first set of commands. We created this new MVC project, and now we have it to work with. So that's step one. And that should not be a huge surprise to anyone because it's actually stuff I've shown before on this podcast. I'm going to go ahead and shut down the web server. Just hit Control-C at the PowerShell dialog here. Maybe, if it lets me. Come on, you can do it. All right. Well, we'll let that finish. There we go. Okay, it shut down. Control-L to clear the screen. And what I'm going to talk about next is the project that's actually going to allow the hot reloading to happen. So this is something that I've done a little bit of research, found someone else who's a lot smarter than me in the .NET world. His name is actually Rick Strahl, and I gave him all the credit in the world for creating this because I think it's really cool. He's basically created a middleware component that you can add into any .NET Core site. Well, I don't know how far back, but basically modern .NET Core sites. And it has this concept of a live reload middleware component as well as its own kind of little web server in a way. And this is the component that, again, we're going to basically add a NuGet package into our project. And we're going to see what it allows us to do is basically make edits to code and see the browser automatically refresh without having to find the right browser tab or hit refresh ourselves or or kind of walk away and forget about where everything is, and oh, are we looking at the most latest output of our saving our code? It's going to do that for us. And again, this is probably not anything that's earth-shattering. You've had this for a while. If you're a front-end developer, think of it like if I just modify a color of a font, like actually what that GIF is showing right there, that's pretty normal to have the browser maybe just automatically refresh. There's a lot of tools that do this. Browser Sync is an NPM package that does it. There's many ways to actually accomplish it, but in the .NET Core world, it's a little bit special because I don't actually want just my front-end files to trigger maybe this hot reload concept. As a .NET developer, I'm going to be doing maybe a little bit more work in the controller or service layer or repository layer that I have on my project. It'd be nice if I could save my server-side changes, my .cs file changes, and have that auto-reload the browser as well. And actually, that's what this component allows us to do. And that's, I think, the cool thing that I don't know if a ton of people know about this type of technology from a pure .NET standpoint. And that's why I thought it would make sense to do a podcast episode on it. So really, it's not rocket science. There's a couple edits to some configuration in the startup of your application to make it aware and make it happen. And really, it's follow along with the instructions that Rick has here on his repo. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to walk through it so you can actually see it or listen to it, depending on how you're consuming the podcast, in action as opposed to just talking about it. So that's what we're going to do. And to do that, I'm going to scroll back up a little bit. Luckily, it's pretty darn simple. It's a NuGet package. So you can imagine there's multiple ways to add a NuGet package. We can do it through the Visual Studio console or the Visual Studio development environment or through the console with the CLI tool. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy and paste the command for adding the live reload middleware. And I'm going to go back to my project. So again, we're already in the project directory of our MVC project with Kentico Content. I'm going to paste in that command, or I could type it as well. So .NET add package, that's what adds a NuGet package. And then we're telling it the name of the NuGet package, westwind.asp.core.live-reload. Hit enter, and it shouldn't be rocket science. What it's basically going to do is add and restore that package into our project. Okay, so that's made it available to us, but now we still have to do some configuration according to the documentation that's set up in the repo for how to enable hot reload. So we'll move on to that next. Basically, you have a couple choices at this point. You could, if you want to use Notepad, edit the files through the command line. I'm not actually that strong or that brave, so I'm not going to do that. But I'm just going to open up VS Code to pop open the project. Again, it's pretty cool that we have the ability to just kind of edit things in VS Code in the .NET Core world. So I actually have, I previously opened the folder because I did this one time as a test, of course. But so we're looking at the Kentico Content MVC folder, and we see our typical MVC setup. We've got our controllers, helpers, models, views, www root folder, and really the startup.cs is the main file that's where all .NET Core apps start, whether it's a web app or a console exe or heck, nowadays it could be Blazor or client-side Blazor. There's lots of choices, but in a way they all kind of start at startup.cs. And you can see the startup.cs of a Kentico Content Boilerplate site actually has a lot in there because this does a lot with setting up the delivery API clients, your caching, routing, some IIS extensions for URL rewriting. There's a lot of things that the out-of-the-box code does. And in fact, I'm going to zoom in a little bit for the people who are watching on the YouTube channel. Oh, Visual Studio Code. Why is it always so hard to remember where to go to zoom? There it is. Zoom. It's a little bit bigger. Maybe we'll do it one more time. Appearance. Zoom in. One of these days, I promise I will remember actually how to zoom in with keyboard, but not today. So you can see we've got a couple of choices, and I'm going to move this over a little bit because we don't actually, I don't want to do that. Wow. I did not really want to try to move the filters directory, but that happens sometimes when you're zooming. Okay, so now you can see that a little bit better. I'm going to switch back to the documentation. And what we've got here is basically, how to handle this from a code standpoint, because that's what we need to do, right? So we added the NuGet package a few seconds ago, and now we're going to use that library. So we have to add a using statement to the top of our files here. Here we go. I write it below using Kentico Content MVC.caching at the very bottom. I'm going to actually say using westwind.asp.core.live reload, and it should light up, or at least it shouldn't error or give me a little weird squiggly line because we've added the NuGet package. That's step one. Pretty hard, obviously. Now, step two is to tell our startup.configureServices method that, hey, we're going to add basically a new service here. And we do have a choice at this point that there are multiple configure services calls inside this method, right? There's a call to add options, which allows the code to have ability to read the configurations of the settings of the project. And then we've got some delivery options for how we want to handle some DI stuff and basically build up the basic delivery client. And you can see we've got a couple of things. I actually don't want to touch any of the other aspects of the Kentico Content Boilerplate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it right below Add Options. You could probably do it almost anywhere you want as long as it's somewhat in here. And I don't like the formatting, so I'm going to tab that in a little bit. So right now we're going to just leave the basics of the services.addLiveReload line of code that we just added. We're not going to get into some of the components yet of what these optional ones are. But that's the main spot of configure services. We're not using Razor view pages or fancy dynamic compilation. That's a new 3.0 feature. We're going to skip that for right now. But then really in the last step is, well, second to last step is in startup.configure, now we actually want to like turn it on. So I'm going to go a little bit lower in the file. And again, you can see in the Kentico Content Boilerplate, there are a lot of things in here. We're doing things like handling exceptions if we're a developer machine. We're adding in the URL rewrites if we're running with IIS. We're redirecting the HTTPS. That's new in the updated boilerplate, I think. Well, it might have been there. I don't quite remember. And then we've got our normal stuff of static files and things like that. So kind of, the recommendation from Rick Strahl is put this pretty early up in the pipeline. So I'm going to do it just because there's a space right here in between use rewriter and before I use HTTPS redirection. I'm going to paste in our use live reload. And I'm going to just add a comment because, you should comment things. It's probably a best practice. Enable hot reload. Right there. Very, very descriptive. And we're almost there because that added it into the system, but basically we need to configure it now. And this is the important thing. You can tell this package or this set of functionality that I only want to watch certain types of files or kind of all the files. His default configuration here, he's got CS, HTML, CSS, JS, HTML, blah, 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 like a lot of different things. And then where a WebSocket is going to communicate with the URL. And of course, because we saw before, we're running at localhost 5000, that's how we're kind of tying these things together, that this is how it's going to communicate and tell the browser it needs to reload. So I'm going to grab that configuration settings. And it says, you can use these in your configuration settings. But if you're new, you may not know exactly where that is. And that's basically your app settings.json in the Kentico Content Boilerplate. So here's where we have like our project ID for how we communicate with the delivery API, our logging level. The responsive whips have to do with the responsive image API system. So actually I'm going to put it right below all the standard stuff. Make some room, add a comma. And we've got a couple curly brackets that we don't actually need. But now I've copy and pasted in live reload with its configuration options. Which client file extension it's going to look for. Is live reload enabled set to true? How much we want that timeout to be. And what do we want to monitor? So we're saying the root of our file system is what we really want to monitor. And again, we're going to communicate on localhost 5000. So I'm going to hit save on that. So we have modified app settings.json in the roots, and we've modified startup.cs in the roots to enable the right settings for making this whole thing work. And really, that's about it. After that, we get into trying it out. So let's do that. I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to go back to our command line here. So remember, we're not running yet. And the best way to do this, especially because we want to watch the build of things, is again, .NET watch run at the command line of where our project is. So again, the context is important in the .NET Core CLI. So I'm doing .NET watch run. I'm going to hit enter. And again, it might take a second or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. But it's going to do start up a watch. It's going to build our site, and it's going to make it running through the .NET Core web server at port 5000. And it's funny because it usually doesn't take very long. Okay, here it goes. All right, so it's done. That didn't take too long. So I'm going to kind of split screen this, and I'm hoping that this kind of comes out the right way. Let's see. Split screen would be Windows right. And then I'm going to choose the browser. Yeah, because I want to make a new browser session. We're going to go to localhost 5000 again in the browser. Come on, I don't have to type it. There we go, localhost 5000. So you can see on the right-hand part of the screen, we did the response to all the different requests. The server's handling, it's dumping out the information it's doing, it's telling us how long the request was. And you can actually see at the bottom, actually, I'm kind of in the way, so I should do that the other way. You can see at the bottom here, we actually have this kind of hidden request waiting at __ live reload. That probably is a good sign. That probably means that the live reload stuff is working. But let's try it out. So again, we have the site loaded. It came up. We have 3 articles on the home page of the Kentico Content Boilerplates. And what's the thing that you might try first? You might want to try to modify a view, right? That's so simple to see if this thing actually works. So now this is going to be interesting. I'm going to try to do like 3 screens in one. Man, I don't know how to actually get this perfectly. What we'll do is we'll try to minimize this a little bit. Oh, come on. Never fails when you want to do a live demo. Can you get things to actually scroll the way you want them to? No, you can't, because you know what? It's my Surface display that's probably complaining about all this. And my other monitor is smaller up in this room. So please bear with me for 1 second while I do this over here. And then come back over here. You gotta be kidding me. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna do this, okay? We're gonna put all 3 things on the screen so you can see the thing move on the right. When it comes to the output of the web server, we'll see the browser refresh when we change the code. At least everything's working right. And I'm gonna open up our homepage view. So let's just get right to it and modify just something very at the top of the file. I'm going to do another H1. Again, I don't really care about SEO at this point. We'll just do our hello world. No, actually, we'll do Kentico Rocks. Yes, definitely have to have that. Hit save. Oh, look, so that triggered an update to the build. You saw that start to move on the console of the PowerShell output. And, oh, look, the browser is reloading by itself. It's spinning. And look at that. We've got Kentico Rocks on the top of the browser. And I didn't have to touch anything from going to the browser. And think about this if you have like 2, 3 monitors, which is what we usually like to do at BizStream. We've got our code in one spot, and we've got the browser in the other monitor, and maybe our Kentico Content admin interface in the third monitor. So we can actually write code, hit save, look at the model a second, and by the time I move my head over to the left, my website should update. And that's pretty easy if it was just a view, right? Because there's no actual like dynamic compile that has to happen. Well, depending on how you're doing it in .NET 3 or .NET Core 3. So I'm going to leave that and we'll do something a little bit more interesting. Like what if we actually start modifying like a controller? And again, there is a home controller for the boilerplates, and it's actually really simple. We're basically using the delivery API to grab 3 articles. I'm going to scroll over a little bit. So I'm grabbing 3 articles. And we're saying limit them to 3. So I could change this to like 1 or 10 or 50. I'm just going to limit the number of articles we want to pull from the delivery API. I'm going to change from 3 to 1. I'm going to hit save. That same thing's going to happen. We're going to trigger a build. It's going to call out. It's going to refresh what it needs to. And actually, if we look over here, we can see that it knows that a file changed, homecontroller.cs. Oh, there's our refresh. Now our browser is automatically refreshing over here. And we went from 3 articles. Now I don't have a scroll. I only have 1 article on the screen. Again, I thought that was pretty cool. Like, maybe it'll save me from having to hit F5 on the keyboard 50 times an hour when I'm really developing quite a bit. Now, The one thing I would say is not perfect is it's not like super fast, and that could depend on a few factors. Could depend on how much code it has to build. Could depend on, I don't know, your Wi-Fi connection to the delivery API. Certain things like that. I'm sure there might be a way to optimize how fast it's doing it, but again, that's the concept of Hot Reload, using it with Kentico Cloud or Kentico Content and the MVC Boilerplate in .NET Core 3. So I thought that's pretty cool. Love to know if people use this in their development workflow or want to use it. Maybe leave me a comment in the YouTube channel or on Twitter, something like that. But that's the episode for today. I thought we'd keep it a little short, but do a technical deep dive because it's been a while since I've done one. And honestly, I love doing this, so it's pretty cool. But, let me know. Try it out. Big props to Rick Strahl for having the live reload component middleware figured out. I actually think he wrote this himself. Again, there's multiple ways to do this. It's not the end of the world if you choose a different way to do it. This one was very simple to set up, which I really appreciated, and it's a very small amount of coding. And again, you can do some configuration, like make sure this is only ever enabled if you're running in development mode. Never run this. I wouldn't do this in the production world, because what it actually does is it watches a file and makes sure that it doesn't try to compile 10 times in a row. If you save like 10 times in a row, it's smart enough to detect that, I actually only need to do the actual reload once the good compile happens. So, okay. Hope you learned something. Again, let me know if you think it's valuable. But with that, thanks for listening to Kentico Rocks episode number 26, and we'll look forward to next time.